Hey folks, it's Sarah here, and what? No! God damn it! I am not talking to you. Hey folks, I've been tagged. Welcome to my first ever book tag. I was tagged for the Sandman book tag by J. Scott Phillips, who has an amazing channel where he goes deep into books, into a lot of science fiction books in particular, and he talks about cover art, like really goes in depth into book cover art, and it's a really cool channel. And he tagged me for this book tag, but because I'm such a newbie, I didn't realize that he had tagged me until recently. So I am so excited to be here today to share my answers for the Sandman book tag prompt. The book tag was created by the BookTube goddess, and it's a wonderful video. I love it. I'll link it below. And all of the prompts are based on The Sandman, which is a comic series written by Neil Gaiman, one of my favorite authors, but I haven't actually read the comic series. I have, however, seen most of the season of The Sandman that is now on Netflix. And so I know a little bit about the series and about this family that these book prompts are based on. So all of the prompts are based on the Endless. And the Endless is a family. It's siblings, 7 siblings. And their names are Death, Destiny, Dream, who the series focuses on primarily as Dream or Morpheus, Despair, Desire, Delirium, and Destruction, otherwise known as the Prodigal. So I'm going to see if I can answer these book prompts using only books I've read this year and only books published by small and independent presses. So stick around and see if I can actually accomplish that. So the first prompt is Destiny. What book or character do you think reflects your own life? And for that, I am going to highlight a book that I have talked about in detail before, Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, and this was translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle, and this is published by Charcot Press. And this book is not reflective of my life as it is now. When I hear the word destiny, I think about the future, and this book takes such an unflinching look at aging and illness and caretaking. Most of us will encounter aging, illness, and caretaking in some form in our lives. And so Elena Knows is about a woman named Elena who lives in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and she has Parkinson's disease. She has one daughter named Rita who has passed away recently. Rita has passed away recently. And up until this point, Rita had been Elena's caretaker. The book opens with Elena setting out across the city of Buenos Aires to, she's trying to prove that Rita did not commit suicide. And so the book takes place over the course of one single day, and we see Elena trying to make her way across the city of Buenos Aires to go interview or talk to the one person left who she thinks has the answers to Rita's death. So that doesn't have anything to do with my own life, but there's so many intense details that are given through flashbacks throughout the novel of Rita and Elena and their life together, and the frustrations Rita felt at being a caretaker for her mother, but also the lengths Rita would go to be an advocate for Elena within the healthcare setting. And it just felt so real. And it felt, as I was reading it, like these are things that we're all going to have to go through at some level. This kind of caretaking for our loved ones, whatever, it could be any loved one, and going through periods of illness, extreme, devastating illness, possibly, encountering the difficulties of aging parents, of aging ourselves. And those intense elements of this novel are so finely drawn. And so when I found out later by reading interviews that Claudia Pinheiro actually went through a lot of this herself because her own mother had Parkinson's disease, and Claudia Pinheiro was her mother's main caretaker. And it just made a lot of sense that it would take having to go through something like this to be able to write a book like Elena knows. So I would say that Destiny fit this book for me for those reasons, and it's a fabulous book. So I highly recommend picking it out if you haven't read it already. So next up is death. And the prompt is, what book has presented death or dying in a way that was unexpected to you? And for that, I would say that has to be New Animal by Ella Baxter. And this is published by $2 Radio. This tells the story of Amelia Aurelia, who lives in Australia, and she is a cosmetic mortician, and her family owns a funeral home. And it was actually when I saw the episode of The Sandman where we meet death for the first time, I immediately thought of New Animal, because the character of Death in The Sandman has a very similar relationship with death as Amelia and her family do in New Animal. For Death in The Sandman, it's her job. She sees death every single day, as does the family within New Animal. And just like Death in The Sandman, Amelia's family feel like they are really there to guide a family through a grieving process and guide a family through something that we all go through, death, and provide a friendly face and a warm greeting, a warm, welcoming place to be during what is an incredibly emotional, difficult time. And that was so similar to how death is depicted in The Sandman. So that had to be my answer here. And Amelia herself, so she's the cosmetic mortician. So she's actually the one who is with the deceased right up before the funeral and is making them look their best. And so she has a very different relationship with a deceased human body than the average person. And she actually finds a lot of beauty and wonder in the work that she does. She's really good at her job, and she really respects the person that she's working with, and she thinks a lot about their life, and she takes a great deal of care in her work. So in both New Animal and in The Sandman, it was just a really comforting concept to think that there is someone at this moment who cares, who has seen all of this before, and who can guide you through the process. You know, most of us don't really have a job like this. So, you know, we tend to not see death quite the same way as Death herself or as Amelia in New Animal. So I highly recommend New Animal by Ella Baxter. And again, this is published by $2 Radio. The next prompt is for dream. And the question is, what book is like a dream or a nightmare? And I picked up the wrong book. For that prompt, I would have to go back to $2 Radio again and say it would be A Door Behind a Door by Yelena Moskovich. And this is the story of Olga. She is an immigrant from the former Soviet Union and moves to Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her family when she's a young child. But the book opens up as she is a young adult. She has had a pretty rough life so far, but her life is starting to kind of it's looking up. Her life is looking up. She's living with a girlfriend who she loves, and she gets a call kind of out of nowhere from a shadowy, mysterious, dangerous figure from her past childhood in the former Soviet Union. And this someone who calls her has information about Olga's missing brother and basically draws Olga into this criminal underworld, but then also possibly actually the true underworld. You aren't really sure if what you're experiencing in this book is really happening or not. And that makes it perfect for this prompt because it is very much like a dream or, in fact, a nightmare. And there's a sense that Olga is going deeper and deeper and deeper down into a nightmare, a very hellish nightmare. And there's even a scene in this very retro and dangerous feeling diner, which reminded me, once I put two and two together through this book tag, very much of the episode of the Sandman with John Dee in the diner, in the 24-hour diner. So if you've seen that, you'll know what I mean. But there is, in fact, a scene in a diner where dangerous, mysterious, ominous things are happening in this book as well. And as I said in my review of this book, my review video of this book, a grammatical spoiler, which I really hope I've coined the term grammatical spoiler. The book ends on a comma, which to me is just like a dream or a nightmare. Dreams and nightmares end on commas. They don't end, there's no like conclusion. You just wake up, and sometimes you have trouble remembering if you're still in the dream or not. When you wake up from a dream, you kind of feel like it's still happening. It's unfinished, or there's some meaning or something you haven't grasped. And that is exactly how I felt at the end of this book. So finishing this book was like waking up from a dream or a nightmare. It's perfect for this prompt. A Door Behind a Door by Yelena Moskovich from $2 Radio. The next prompt is Prodigal. What is your favorite book about a prodigal character? And so I'm not going to go with my favorite book because I'm just trying to do stuff that I've read this year or recently. But I also can't actually think of a single book with an actual prodigal character, like with the full idea of prodigal, like the prodigal son, which is a son who like spends all his money, runs off from home, spends all his money, comes back repentant, and then is forgiven. And I couldn't even think of any book that I've read that like follows that exact formula. I don't think I tend to read things with quite that much of a formula to them. So I broke it down into its specific parts and picked a book for each of those specific elements of the prodigal character. So the first one, for the actual meaning of prodigal, would be spending money or resources freely or excessively. And so for that, I picked Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. And this version is published by New York Review of Books. And Lolly Willows tells the story of kind of a middle-aged woman in 1926. We're in 1920s or early before that in England. And we have this woman, Lolly Willows, and she lives with her family. She's never married. She kind of is used by her family to watch by her brother to watch his kids and take care of the house. And she decides one day that she's done with that. She's gonna leave the city, leave London. She wants to go live in the country. So she goes to her brother and she's like, "Can I have my inheritance? Because I want to go live on my own now. I'm done taking care of your family." And her brother's like, "Oh, I spent all your money. Sorry." She's like, "Oh, thanks." So she doesn't quite have the resources to go buy herself a house that she thought she would be able to. But she still is able to anyway. So the prodigal person in this sense is her brother, who has spent not even his own resources and money, his sister's resources and money, freely and excessively. So that's my first answer for the prodigal character. So the second element of the prodigal story would be the return home. And without the excessive spending piece of it, just purely a character returning home, which I actually have a ton of books that feature a character who returns home. But one that I've been reading recently is called The Seed Keeper, and it's about The Seed Keeper is by Diane Wilson, and this is published by Milkweed Editions. And this, the character in this book who is returning home is named Rosalie Ironwing. And she is a Dakota woman from who lives in Minnesota. And her father died when she was very young, and she was sent into foster care as a child and then as a teenager. And she ends up marrying a white man, a farmer, and has a very complicated marriage with him. And then her husband passes away. And it's at that point that the novel starts with Rosalie returning to the cabin for the first time where she grew up with her father. She hadn't been there since her father died and she was taken away. So the novel opens with Rosalie returning home to this cabin in the middle of a snowstorm. And there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's nothing there, but all of her father's, even decades later, a lot of her father's things are still in this cabin. And so she's returning home and is kind of reclaiming her roots a bit. And the story goes back and forth in time, so we don't spend all of the story in this cabin with Rosalie. But that is really the central image and the central scene that the rest of the book is built around, is Rosalie returning to this beautiful cabin in the middle of nowhere to grieve all of the many, many losses in her life. And it's really beautiful. I highly recommend it. Again, that's The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson from Milkweed Editions. And then the last element of the prodigal character that I kind of teased out from the rest of them was the repentant nature of the character who's returning after having spent all this money or done wrong or whatever it was. It's just that repentance that is the element I kind of tried to look for in a book that I've read recently. And so I picked, and I have to say that I have not yet met the prodigal. So I don't know how well any of this fits within the Sandman series. So I don't know how well any of this fits in with the actual character of the prodigal within the Sandman series. But anyway, the repentant character that I picked was from The Adventures of China Iron by Gabriela Cabezon Camara. And again, this is published by Charco Press and translated by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre from the Spanish. And this novel takes place in 1872, and it's a retelling and a reclaiming. So there's a famous gaucho epic from Argentina called Martin Fierro, and it's about this character, Martin Fierro, and his wife in the original epic, which was published in 1872. There's only like one or two lines given to Martin Fierro's wife, and she's never named, and she's only mentioned like once basically in the epic. And so this novel is about his wife, and it's reclaiming her story. And so he basically abandons her with her two children in the middle of the Pampas region of Argentina. And again, this novel is also set in 1872. So she decides one day she's done with the rough, poverty-stricken life that she is living, and she is setting off on her own. She's not waiting around for her husband, who has been cruel to her, to return. She's just heading out. So she leaves her two sons with an elderly, kind family couple, and she heads off. And on the way, she meets another young woman named Liz, and the character is named China Iron, and also referred to as Joe within the novel as well. So China, or Joe, falls in love with this other character, Liz, and they set off on this incredible journey across the Pampas in an ox-drawn cart, and they have all sorts of adventures and encounter many, many characters. And then in the end, China is reunited with her previously cruel husband, Martin Fierro, and he is very repentant of how he has acted in the past and is forgiven by her. And that's I feel like I'm not really spoiling that because it's not really a key element of the ending, but hopefully I possibly just kind of spoiled. I'll put an alert earlier that I am spoiling this. So anyway, I was quite frankly shocked when she so easily forgave him. But that is a key element of the prodigal story, is that the prodigal son returns and is forgiven. And that is very much what happened here in The Adventures of China Iron. So that leads us nicely into the next prompt, which is desire. And the prompt itself is, what's the sexiest book you've ever read? So since I'm just looking at books that I've read this past year, I would have to again say The Adventures of China Iron might be the sexiest book I've read. There are a lot of very sensual, erotic scenes in this book for sure, between Liz and China, among others. So there's just a whole lot of love going on in this book. So this year, I think for sure would be the most erotic, sexy book that I think I've read, possibly. So again, that's China Iron, The Adventures of China Iron, written by Gabriella Cabazon Camara, translated by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre, and published by Charco Press, which is a UK-based publisher that publishes wonderful books, mostly from Latin America. So the next prompt is despair. What is the most depressing book you have read? So for that prompt, I think the book that came to mind of my recent reads would have to be Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck, translated from the German by Susan Bernofsky. And this was published by New Directions. This is a novel, a very short novel. It's all centers around a house that was built on the shores of a beautiful, picturesque lake in Germany. And we stick with the house throughout the whole book. So we see it when it was built, I think in the 1800s at some point. And then we see the generations and different owners that go through the house up until, I think, present day. So we see all of these people coming through the house, and therefore we follow the house through history, and in particular through a very tumultuous period of history, especially in Germany, since this time period mostly covers the 20th century. So there are some moments in this book that are very hard to read, and they almost come at you you should expect them, but for some reason they still shocked me and really hit me hard. Those all had to do with the Holocaust. And Erpenbeck doesn't waste any words when describing what happens to some of the family members in this book when we get to the Holocaust period. It's heart-wrenching. It's hard to read. There were times when I had to put the book down for a couple days, but it's beautifully written, and I feel like the descriptions of the book, the summaries of the book that I read leading up to it, don't really do justice to how hard-hitting it is, or how really brutal some moments in this book can be. But I just remember my heart stopping at the end of some of these chapters. They really are filled with despair and haunting scenes that stick with you for a while. But it's a absolutely beautiful book. The description of the house and the landscape is so exquisite. So I highly recommend Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck from New Directions. The next prompt is Delirium, and the question is, what is the most absurd or nonsensical book you've read? And when I think back to the last year, that had to be only one thing, and that was My Volcano by John Elizabeth Stintsey. This book is very hard to describe. It's about a volcano that suddenly starts rising in the middle of Central Park in New York City. It starts growing. A volcano starts growing in the middle of Central Park in New York City. And that doesn't even describe half of the absurd things that go on in this novel. It's apocalyptic. It's kind of described, I think, as like an eco horror. We're following several different characters, and they're all in little sections where you're following different characters mostly throughout one single summer. The summer of 2016, I think. Yes. So we're in the summer of 2016, and we're following these different characters, and there's jumps in time back and forth. And then there are kind of like alternate versions of what's happening. So you kind of go back in time and it restarts the story, and something different is suddenly happening with some of these characters, but you don't really realize it because it's been so long since you were last with that character. And it's described as a kaleidoscope on the back. That's like one of the blurbs. It describes the book as a kaleidoscope, and that's the absolute perfect word for this book. It is a kaleidoscope because it's bright gems of incredibly described scenes with wonderful characters, and then someone turns the kaleidoscope and everything shifts around and you are confused about where you are, but everything is still bright and beautiful and incredible language. And so you're having a good time because you're looking at something very lovely. but you have no idea what's going on. And then someone turns the kaleidoscope again and everything shifts all over again. On the back, it also says it's structured like a spiral. And it is what it feels like. It feels like you're spiraling down into something and you don't really know where you're going, which also seems to me like delirium. You're in a spiral that you can't escape. So that is just exactly what My Volcano by John Elizabeth Dinsey is like. That's published by $2 Radio. Highly recommend it. Big thanks to J. Scott Phillips for tagging me, and a big thanks to BookTube Goddess for creating such a fun book tag. It's been a ton of fun. It's inspired me to go check out the comic series by Neil Gaiman, because I do love Neil Gaiman, and I've been loving the Netflix series as well. So excited to check that out. I'm so new to BookTube that I don't really think I have anyone that I can tag and feel comfortable about it. So I'm not going to specifically tag anybody. But please, if you are going to be doing this book tag, comment below. Let me know. I would love to see what other people pick for their prompts. Thanks, Mom, for watching. If you are watching, bye.